Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we're talking about the restoration shamans in Dragonflight. This is going to be a video that based on my testing. I'm going to be talking about the good and the bad things about Resto Shaman in Mythic plus in raids, my suggestions in terms of how to improve the class. But keep in mind, I'm only one person, so feel free to disagree or agree with the things that I'm going to say in this video. Let me know how you feel about Resto Shaman if you tested Shaman in Dragonflight Beta. And this video is going to try and help you to decide if Shaman is fun. And straight off the bat, we have to talk about the Shaman gameplay, and I have to say that Shaman gameplay in Dragonflight is not all that different from Shadowlands, which is not a bad thing because that can be said for a lot of healers heading into the next expansion. I think a lot of people were somewhat down about Resto Shaman in Dragonflight Beta purely based on the numbers that they were seeing in terms of DPS, in terms of HPS and things like that, but it's not coming as a surprise that in the last week and a bit, Blizzard has significantly buffed Resto Shaman DPS. They initially fixed an issue or a bug with Resurgence. They also buffed Shaman's damage multiple times. They also focus on things like Flame Shock and Lava Burst, and that is only a good thing. And I do have to say that after testing multiple Mythic Plus dungeons, Resto Shaman DPS feels really good. I think it is on par with a lot of other healers, but you do have to remember that Resto Shaman has to decide when to DPS or heal. Unlike many other classes, you don't heal through your DPS, with the exception of Healing Rain with Acid Rain trait, where you place Healing Rain, it's going to deal damage and heal at the same time. But a lot of the times you have to decide whether you have the time to DPS or you need to go into triage healing or try and save someone's life. Don't get me wrong, you still have talents like Focused Insight. Casting Flame Shock reduces the mana cost of your next heal by 20% and increases its healing effectiveness, which means that dealing damage helps when healing. And on top of that, you have Master of Elements, where casting Lava Burst increases the damage or healing of your next nature, physical or frost spell by 10%, which ties into the concept of dealing damage allows you to heal for more, which is really important in concepts like Mythic Plus content. But you also have to remember that throughout most of the Dragonflight Beta, Resto Shaman damage, especially things like Lava Burst, Flame Shock, were somewhat weak, and it wasn't uncommon for a Resto Shaman doing Mythic Plus content just spamming Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt throughout the whole dungeon. And that is mainly to do with the fact that you have a plethora of abilities that buff your Lightning Bolt, buff your Chain Lightning, and all of a sudden those spells seem to be like the only spells that you should be casting. But Blizzard did try to rectify that issue. They tried to buff your whole arsenal of abilities. They also focused on Flame Shock and Lava Burst, and I think Blizzard is trying to go back to that Shadowlands DPS rotation where it is worth casting Lava Burst depending on how many targets you are dealing with. So you can see which direction Blizzard is heading, but it's yet to be seen if it's going to work that way. I just hope Blizzard is able to achieve an AoE rotation for Resto Shaman in terms of DPS that is going to be more intriguing than what we had for months on Dragonflight Beta. But that's enough of DPS talk. I think a lot of Resto Shamans are happy with what's happening to Resto Shaman in terms of DPS. I think the buffs are very needed, and I think the fact that Blizzard is looking at Flame Shock and Lava Burst, it's also a warranted change. I think a lot of Resto Shamans are still looking for some significant HPS increase in order for Shaman to be considered more mandatory. But what about gameplay? I always found Resto Shaman to be an interesting character because I main Resto Shaman for a really long time in Shadowlands. I enjoyed the fact that Resto Shamans had plethora of buttons, a lot of utility, a lot of buttons to press depending on situation you are facing. And I think a lot of people are also fearing that because in Dragonflight, Resto Shaman is arguably or could be considered a healer that could have the most buttons depending on your talent spec. But I have to say, for those people who are relatively scared, even though Resto Shaman could have so many buttons, your rotation or active rotation for Mythic Plus and raids is not that complicated. And I think if you enjoyed your Resto Shaman in Shadowlands, you're gonna have a really good time with Resto Shaman in Dragonflight. I think the majority of the complexity of the class comes from the fact that you can use things like Cloudburst. And I think Cloudburst is still a very good talent, and it makes the class, for me, my personal opinion, I think Cloudburst is something that makes Resto Shaman what it is, and I think it needs that complexity in order to be a somewhat more interesting healer. I really enjoyed my Resto Shaman in beta testing Mythic Plus and things like that. The fact that I can use Stormkeeper before a pull, and then I have these instant cast Chain Lightnings to do damage. The fact that it can combine Stormkeeper with Ancestral Guidance for good DPS and healing felt really impactful. And on top of that, you have things like Nature Swiftness to allow you to have those instant casts more often, because the biggest thing that I heard about Resto Shaman, or the negative thing, is that Resto Shaman feels slow. And I fully agree with those comments because a lot of Resto Shamans are judging the gameplay of Resto Shaman in Dragonflight based on their Shadowlands counterpart. And in Shadowlands Season 4, you have so much more haste, your heals and DPS abilities feel a lot more fluid because they're faster. And when you go into Dragonflight, you're gonna notice that a couple of things that are missing because you're not gonna have the same haste values and your heals and DPS abilities are going to be slower. And I think that could be so easily rectified if flash floods would actually help with GCD or lower the GCD cooldown, because right now if you're doing Mythic Plus content as Resto Shaman and if you're pressing things like Riptide, Healing Surge, you're not getting a whole lot of value out of it because flash floods does not lower the GCD of Healing Surge, and at the very least flash floods should be reworked in order to give you haste. Haste lowers GCD and it provides a much more fluid gameplay. You also will notice that you no longer have Vesper Totem, which I feel is a big loss for Resto Shaman, because the fact that Vesper Totem, you could place it down, you could do damage, which also going to provide healing, or you could heal and it could provide damage, felt like very natural component to your Mythic Plus build as a Restoration Shaman. But I think Blizzard is trying to replace Vesper Totem with something like Acid Rain trait, which is going to allow your healing rain to deal damage. I honestly going to say that this is my personal opinion, that healing rain should be part of your rotation in Mythic Plus. I hope that Blizzard is going to balance Acid Rain in such a way that it's worth casting, because that's probably one of the few things that changes from your rotation from Shadowlands to Dragonflight. So if there's going to be some imbalance issues where Healing Rain is not going to be worth casting because Acid Rain is too weak or something like that, I would be very sad. That's my personal opinion, because like I said, Resto Shaman gameplay is not changing all that much. And you're also missing your Earth Elemental Earthquake legendary, which again has been such a potent legendary in Shadowlands in terms of dealing Mythic Plus damage. And I'm not sad for that to go at all. I actually really dislike the playstyle that Earth Elemental Earthquake legendary provided, because you had to heal this Guardian who just taunted everyone and you have to make sure it does not die. It almost felt like this gameplay was never really intended, and in really high keys it felt really awkward, so you had to use your Earth Elemental just specifically for boss fights. So I'm happy that Earth Elemental Earthquake legendary is gone, but I hope that Blizzard is going to find a way to compensate for the loss of damage, and I think the recent DPS buffs are really helping with that. Also, when testing a lot of the raiding content of Resto Shaman, I felt right at home, because you have a bunch of old abilities making a comeback. Things like Primordial Wave, this was the staple for Resto Shaman raiding in Shadowlands for a really long time, until Chain Harvest from Ventier was kind of buffed and became the norm. You also have things like Wellsprings making a comeback. Honestly, you feel like you're doing a similar thing that you did in Shadowlands. You don't have to relearn the whole new class. Everything feels somewhat at home. You do have some new talents being reworked in terms of Unleash Life and things like that, which could provide with some really interesting gameplay changes when you combine it with certain buffs. But again, I'm not going to talk too much about it because Resto Shaman is being changed on the weekly basis. And I think the biggest question for Resto Shaman is going to be, how powerful is Chain Heal? Historically speaking, Blizzard has had a really hard time balancing Chain Heal. It's either too powerful and you just spam Chain Heal all of the time, or it's not powerful enough and you never ever press it. My personal opinion, or my personal hope for Resto Shaman in raiding situations, because there's a lot of builds right now that are emerging, I hope the Resto Shaman is going to be able to sprinkle in Chain Heal when needed, especially during AoE moments when people are stacked. Talents like High Tide are making a comeback, and there is certain other talents that also buff your Chain Heal usage. And if you don't need AoE healing and you need that Triage healing, you go back to that Riptide, Healing Wave, or Healing Surge usage, depending if the person needs immediate attention. And of course, this is not the full rotation for raiding Resto Shaman. There are a bunch of other spells and talents that can be included in this section, but it's interesting to note the power of Chain Heal, because I hope, or I expect, further changes to happen which could alter this list. Leave a comment below on how you would like your Chain Heal to be utilized, especially in something raid situations, because it has been so different throughout the years. This is my hope for the future in terms of Resto Shaman raid healing. I hope they're going to be able to make use of its full toolkit, which has not always been the truth when you look at different expansions. Now, in terms of the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of improving Restoration Shaman, I have to say there are certain talents that I was just really not in love with or didn't really enjoy. Things like Ancestral Awakening. This is something that I tested in Mythic Plus mainly. While I do think that Ancestral Awakening could scale pretty well later down the line and things like that, I think it's an extremely passive talent. You already have things like Earth Living, which Earth Living was buffed by something like 250%, and now it's a very decent 1-point talent. I think the fact that you also have another passive talent with Ancestral Awakening doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I wish that the spec tree for Resto Shaman, especially in Mythic Plus environment, would be reworked a little bit further. I would really like to see Restoration Shaman Shadowlands tier set making a comeback in terms of a talent form. I'm not sure which node, but I really believe that the fact that in Shadowlands you could use certain totems and those totems would actually shoot out Chain Heal, this would give you a lot of breathing room, especially in Dragonflight, because you have that HP increase which makes healing a lot more difficult. These free Chain Heals would give you more breathing room in terms of try to catch up with healing or allow you to do more damage, which is always going to be a win-win. And again, this is just my opinion. I think Blizzard Blizzard is really fond of reusing old tier sets, old legendaries and things like that, and I don't think it would be very difficult for Blizzard to implement it, and I think it would provide more value than a lot of other talents that Resto Shaman has in the spec tree at this given point. But guys, let me know how you feel. This is just my opinion. I think Resto Shaman, both in Mythic Plus and raids, felt really fun. I think there are some concerns in terms of, hey, it might feel a little bit slow, hey, the damage or healing might not be as good as other healers. But I think Blizzard is aware of the fact, and they buffed Resto Shaman DPS by a huge amount. They're trying to rectify Resto Shaman rotation in terms of making Flame Shock and Lava Burst being more impactful. And I think or hope that in the next couple of weeks, Blizzard is also going to look at Resto Shaman HPS, because I don't think Resto Shaman is like really down at the very bottom compared to everyone else, but I think it could use a tuning fix. So a summary of the whole video is that if you enjoy Resto Shaman in Shadowlands, you're going to like Resto Shaman in Dragonflight. There's a couple of new things making emergence in terms of talents. Hey, healing rain, dealing damage in Mythic Plus is pretty great, Stormkeeper and things like that. So if you're looking for a healer who's relatively simple, who has a button for pretty much any situation and has some sick transmogs, I think Resto Shaman is going to be the choice for you guys. Let me know how you feel about this video, and I'll see you in my next guide.